Okay, as we've gotten to about 4 past, and I can see that the people joining the call has slowed down significantly. I think I want to get us going on the session. So, first of all, let's say thank you everybody for coming again to the second session of our Futures and Foresight training at the Emerging Voices Network. Today being a session on scenario development. So last session, published from Horizon 5 about their work, how they use different foresight tools, how it kind of collectively, comes together to produce their work, such as the radar, which you were familiarized with last week. And then you got to have a go at using some futures wheels, and you use two different types of futures wheels. One of them was quite more of a, I guess, a linear type way of thinking about using a futures wheel, going directly from kind of an effect to then the kind of consequence of that, then the next consequence. And then the other futures wheel was more thinking about the scale and going from a local all the way up to planetary scale of what these impacts could be using drivers. Obviously, last week there was quite a bit of talking at the beginning to kind of give people the presentation and also to get people give a bit of a background as to why we're doing this and about futures and foresight. So this week we will be spending a lot more of the time focused in the actual activities. We'll also be revisiting the futures wheel exercise, because to give people a second go with it, but also because futures wheels are often paired with scenario development, because when you're using scenario development, you obviously want to be thinking about a specific future in mind, whether it's for your organization or for maybe for us in thinking about the future of the nuclear field. But you need some drivers. You need to kind of collect some data and decide, okay, well, if we're going to think about the future, what factors do we think are going to shape the future? What main key drivers are we going to identify, and what are the main consequences of these drivers we can think of? So that is something that Futures Wheels is very good at giving you the ability to sit down, think of the main issues, think about how they might operate individually, and then you can then bring them together in a scenario and really explore how they work together. So that's kind of the main point of the session. The other update and change for this session is that we have upgraded, and we will be doing this on Miro, which should be a lot better for user interface. And also every group will have their individual sections within the same sheet. So I also won't have to jump around and send 10 links or whatever it was last time between the groups, because Miro's servers can handle it. When I tested with the previous program, if we were all using separate sheets on the same board, I think the server might have exploded. So it didn't cope well when I tested it with about 10 people. So yeah, I think there was 30 something last time. So that would not have worked. So yeah, we'll be able to use Miro all on the same board, but each group will have their own section. So you'll know which section you're in based on which breakout room you're in. And then we'll be able to have some time to come together at the end of the session and discuss the scenarios we've developed. So that being said, I'm going to get into the discussing, first of all, scenario development itself before I then lead you towards the exercise and share the link, which again, everybody be shared the same link before we then go into the breakout rooms. So the type of scenario development we're really looking at in particular is exploratory and normative scenario development. So a key use of scenario development is monitoring extrapolations of key issues, drivers and trends identified through scanning, provides us with a short, to midterm perspective. So this is known as foresight. So for example, Horizon 2045's radar, which we discussed in the last session, and we'll be using it for a bit of inspiration today, is built from a very long scanning process, which involves, surveying, interviewing many experts across the world on existential threats. As we saw from that session, you can take just a single issue or driver identified through that process and then start thinking about its implications for the future in a much wider sense. So a developed scenario, however, to take it further than what we did with the futures wheel last week, is a deeper exploration of a sequence or combination of events that could take place in the future to the medium to long term. So this is thinking a bit further ahead, and also thinking about how these individual drivers can interact with each other. So one thing to keep in mind is that scenarios are not predictable. predictions. They offer interesting and potentially challenging imaginings of the future, and they're used to explore multiple alternative ways that the future might develop. It is therefore important to consider more than one scenario, as by creating several scenarios, you can test how different strategies and interventions could work under multiple circumstances. So scenarios often challenge the status quo because they must be communicated clearly, carefully, sorry. So the potential uses of scenario development is to identify the critical uncertainties that will shape the future, question the assumptions we have about the direction of the future, understand how these uncertainties can shape alternative futures and affect your goals in different ways, and of course inform strategy and planning work, including policy making, which for our work in the field. So a scenario set can help you to develop options to understand risks and opportunities or dynamics of how the future may evolve, generate strategies or policies to put in place if that scenario or parts of it become reality, generate robust strategies and policies that would be effective across different scenarios, and to also to help you understand your preferred future or elements of that preferred future that you wish to encourage, or elements of futures that you dislike and want to discourage. And scenarios can also serve as a early warning system to helping you identify signals or events that may suggest a particular future is emerging. So if you, for example, this exercise identified that in the build up to a certain scenario that you do not want, that a couple of factors or a couple of issues or happen, a couple of events happen that you would identify that could lead to this future. If this event then happens, that may give you a signal that actually this future might be coming unless we initiate action to avoid it. So that is something, so it can help with that long-term kind of planning. And at the end of this exercise, as we kind of discussed in this part, we will then try to use the scenarios developed by each group to think about some policy recommendations to encourage the aspects of our scenarios that we like and to discourage the aspects that we dislike, and to kind of mitigate the risks that you identify, with areas where there's uncertainty, where you're unsure if this could make the chances of risks or negative situations worse. So the key steps in using scenario development is, first of all, identify driving forces. So this is, of course, in the scanning process where you will identify what is shaping the world now and the key reasons why we are where we are. So we will address this by doing a futures wheel exercise at the start of this session, where you will identify your driving forces individually and as a group. Then the second part of it is to identify critical uncertainties. So where do we want to go and what are the biggest uncertainties? So this part of the exercise will be when you've developed your futures wheel. At the end of that exercise, you'll then be asked to pick some of what you think are the main key, most important issues from that, and then copy and paste them into the ready to then use as your main key issues when you then develop your scenario. Then stage 3 is develop plausible scenarios. So then you will have time to develop your scenario and really think about these issues and these factors that you've thought about. What will the future look like in 2045 if these drivers play out how you think that they might, and how will these drivers interact with each other? And then the fourth step is discuss implications and paths. So what would we do if the world was like this? So that is how we will then use the the scenario to develop policy recommendations. So as the session is, as I said, focused on scenario development, rather than scanning, we will use the Horizon 2045 nuclear systems map to select amongst you as a group. The first kind of 5 minutes, you'll have a chance to look at the radar, look at the main issues in that radar, and identify what are the kind of main issues that you want to focus on between your parts of the group. What is the which issues, and also to have one each, so that you can work on your individual part of the section first, and then come together as a group and then build that into a wider scenario. And then obviously the main critical uncertainties you want to think about is, what ultimately will the nuclear field look like in 2045? So that will be what we'll be building up to. So I will in a minute share the link with you for your for the Miro board. But first of all, I'm just going to get up the Horizon 2045 nuclear futures map as well, because I'm going to send you that you can. I'll give you two options to kind of use as your inspiration to pick kind of main your main issues in the field and main drivers. So there is the nuclear field map by the Horizon 2045 team. And there is the radar. Should give you plenty of options to pick issues that you think are relevant to nuclear field. So I will just quickly put the radar in the map. There we go. I just lost the tab for that, and also the radar, specifically the issues page, because there are many options there to choose from. So I'm now going to show you what the resources look like this week. So I will go to share screen. Hello, so I've decided to re-record the instruction part of the video just to make it clearer and to give a clear visual example of how to use this futures wheel. So if you've attended or watched the recording of the previous session, you'll know that we did a futures wheel for the first session, and we're building off the back of that for this session. We are also doing this because scenario development is often paired with using a futures wheel to give us the initial drivers and main issues that we will use to shape the scenario that we'll go on to develop. So for this exercise, we will begin the session, as we finished the last, by using a futures wheel to list the characteristics and issues that your group has chosen from the radar. So first of all, what we want you to do in groups of 4 is to pick an issue each, probably from the Horizon 2045 radar is a great example to give you some inspiration, or the nuclear field map as well by Horizon 2045. So just for this example, I've only picked 2 here. One person here has gone for more nuclear weapons, an issue from the radar. So that is their main driver. This is the future that they're seeing. There will be more nuclear weapons. Somebody else, starting from this column, has gone for shifting nuclear landscape. Now, you would then have another person starting off at the bottom and another person starting off from the left side. So you'd have 4 columns filled. There would be a gap between each column. So for the first 10 minutes, you would start individually filling your sections out. So if we zoom into the map a little bit more, this is done like the last map from the first session on different scales. So you have of security. So you start with individual security, national security, regional security, global security, and planetary security. So you can work your way up in scale as you do this exercise. You, of course, complete this individually, filling out with your post-it notes. You can easily copy to make more post-it notes by using this function here. You can copy that and then paste. That didn't work. I'm not quite sure what I've just made there. You can copy, then paste to make sure you have the exact same post-it with the exact same size. As you complete this, you'll fill these out on these different levels for the first 10 minutes individually. And what you should then end up with is 4 rows, if you have 4 people in your group, with completed sections on each level for a bunch of issues and drivers that you think would be the consequence of these actions or of these events. Then for the next part of the session, for the next 20 minutes, you then come back together as a group, analyze the points you've made individually, and then for the next 20 minutes, you work together to refine your wheel and combine your issues together. So the reason that we've left gaps is that, for example, in the gap between shifting nuclear landscape and more nuclear weapons, you would then combine your 2 scenarios here and have them bounce off each other. So as you identify issues in both, you would then find issues that are combined from both. So more nuclear weapons and a shifting nuclear landscape. So they would, I would imagine, would go hand in hand. You could think of a lot of different issues, not just that there'd be a higher quantity of nuclear weapons, but a shifting nuclear landscape could also kind of bounce off it in terms of explaining why there's more nuclear weapons, but also explaining the new dangers. What is this shifting landscape that you've identified? Is this a difference in the relationships between the nuclear states? Is it differences in technology? This obviously there's many possibilities. So for each section, you would fill the gaps in between the scenarios. So same for whatever the bottom one would be, and the furthest left column. Once you have then finished that, for the last 10 minutes, you have this yellow box here. As a group, you would then decide of all of the different issues and drivers that you've identified to going with your main topics. You decide what you think would be the most significant and the key drivers of the future. This combined map is being used to build one scenario. So all of these different issues can be true at the same time that you'd be working from and picking the main primary drivers. And you would then copy and paste the post-its here so that you have a copy on the map we had it originally, and then paste the ones made into here. That should then give you your main drivers, issues, and events that will then be used for your scenario. So that would then wrap up part one. Then when you go to part two, this is where you can truly get creative and work on your scenario itself. So the first part is developing your group scenario. So now that we have our scenario, we must think about how we would try to move forward if we found ourselves in this world in 2045. For the next 30 minutes, the groups are then asked to write up their scenarios in the first box on the left here. So here you'll be able to flesh out all of these drivers that could help shape the future, focusing on developing a potential scenario for 2045. So you have a time frame to build to. You can be as creative as you like. You can use your writing skills. And of course, what is key to remember that the different drivers you've identified all exist in the same world. They do not exist in a vacuum. So they very much will be interacting with each other. Their potential interactions and impacts they have on each other would shape then the following decades. So just like in the previous policy cycle where we studied the interlinkages between existential threats, these drivers will have relationships and will collectively shape the world. Then once you have finished the next section, working together for 30 minutes, you would then think about the implications that your scenario has had on the future of nuclear weapons and arms control, and develop a set of policy recommendations based on your future scenarios. This is a big point of scenario development, is you develop the scenario, you look at what positive outcomes there are, some negative outcomes, perhaps some opportunities for positive change, and you think about how you can encourage the future that you want, the more desirable aspects, and how you can try to negate the chances of a future you don't like from taking place. So the scenario is then used to develop recommendations to try to make the best version of 2045 that you could envisage. So this is generally the main point of using scenario development, is to use the scenario to then make some practical policy recommendations to help improve your policies and your general direction to prepare for the different parts of this potential future. So, as I said, you need to think carefully about what aspects of this future are desirable and what policies can encourage these outcomes, what aspects are negative, and how can we legislate to mitigate these risks and challenges. So it's key to remember that there are new risks to mitigate, but also potential opportunities for positive change. So these recommendations should focus on not only developing a stronger nuclear weapons arms control, but also for generating a more conductive environment for arms control discussions. So by identifying the implications first, you can use these to guide and inform your policy recommendations to make the best plan for the future. And once you've completed that will be the completion of the exercise. So you have major drivers and your main issues and your main events, turn them into a scenario, have a reasonably complete scenario, in the left box here, and then in the right box, you'll then be able to develop a set of policy recommendations. So on Miro, this is one of the blank extra pages that I made. I'll just quickly give you a glance at just what some of the groups, how their work roughly looked once they worked together. So this is just, for example, group 5. So as you can see, they mostly filled out their features wheel. They came with a couple of the key drivers, and they actually combined them, and they organized themselves into this, where they combined 3 of these main issues into one larger main event and direction. And then they took these and they used them to shape their main scenario and then their policy recommendations collectively. So I hope that makes the instructions clear on how to use this. I will share the link to this page. This page not only contains a few blank examples that you can use, but it also contains all of the other group sessions thanks to our new Mirror subscription. So I hope you enjoy looking at this exercise, and I look forward to seeing your contributions. Thank you. And then I'm going to now send a link. So this guest link, send it in this main chat first of all. I'm hoping everybody should be able to add this. You don't have to make an account. You should be able to access it as a guest. I've set it to anybody with the link can edit, so you should be able to go straight onto the board, and you should then be able to edit it with the sticky notes and text, for example. But yeah, everybody should be able to now, should have access to the board now, should be able to open it. And then, as I said, once you've been allocated groups, each group will be able to work on one of these sections each. I just need to see how many we have in the course. We've got about 25 people. So I'll make sure that I make the correct amount of breakout rooms. You'll be randomly assigned like last week, but then you'll stay in the same groups for parts 1 and 2. Sarah says that you've been asked for an email address and a password. Were you prompted to kind of sign in or join as a guest? Because it should let you be able to decide not to sign in and just join as guest. Because that's how I've always joined when I've done them. If not, you can make an account. You won't have like, full on access. I can see that most people have been able to join. So for the first 5 minutes, I want everybody to, once you go into the breakout rooms, use the Foresight radar and or the nuclear threats map to kind of pick an issue individually each, and then you can get going with your exercise with the first part of the exercise. So I'm now going to open the rooms. I am hopefully this should send everybody in. Okay, I believe all of the rooms should be closed. So first of all, thank you very much for taking part in the whole session and for staying for this long. It's really appreciated, and I can tell from watching the boards progress how much you've all engaged in it. It's been really interesting to watch, and it's been nice as well having you all on one screen so I can move around the groups and see what's been going on. So I just first of all, I'd like to say I'm really impressed with how much has been done. Obviously, this is like a limited amount of time to work on something like this. But I think from what I've seen, it's again shown just how much thinking you can do through a couple of exercises. You've gone in the space of, you started the exercises after the instructions were given less than 2 hours ago, and you've gone through all of these tools, and now have a fleshed out scenario and a set of policy recommendations. So that is really impressive. It also shows how these tools can really help you to think in these ways. So I guess first of all, I wanted to open the floor up to you as the participants and ask and see if there's anything you wanted to speak about in your group that was particularly interesting, how your scenarios went, maybe your policy recommendations, kind of the main findings you had from the exercise. Because as I said, I'm sure that there's a lot to discuss from these scenarios. So if there's anybody from any of the groups who wants to speak, please, feel free to do so. Now the question is, do I bully anybody into doing it, or I guess the main case of it for the start, how, first of all, I guess with these exercises, how useful in general did you find them as groups? And how do you think that it kind of helped, or how do you think that it worked in terms of setting up these leading to policy recommendations? Oh yes, go ahead. Go to question, please.
Great, thanks. Yeah, I would start off with just the experience we had as a group. I think it was enriching. Everyone was just contributing, coming up with ideas. I think that was the most important part. The approach we took at first, especially with coming up with a group scenario, we gave everyone the liberty to just express themselves and just let their imagination fly. Coming up with any form of scenario they can think of, and we try to find, synergies with everyone's contribution up to our policy recommendations. So that was the approach we took. And I think the most interesting thing was just distilling the ideas and finding synergies and just weaving them together until we come up with like solutions. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think that's kind of exactly how I felt when I first done these exercises myself, working with different groups of people. That the first future and foresight training I got was not nuclear specific. We had people from lots of different fields, and when we came together in the sessions, I had people who worked in biosecurity, for example. And when everybody's able to come from with their own perspectives and expertise, even within the nuclear field, obviously we have so many different expertise. I think what these exercises are really good at is helping people of totally different, backgrounds to come together from different positions and just bounce ideas off each other, because obviously there's stuff that, we all don't know about from each other's expertise, perspectives we wouldn't have, the way we would think about the implications of certain policy recommendations. I think it's a really good tool for collaboration, and why I've kind of been pushing the last year or so to get this kind of in the EVN, because I think it's a really good way to bring all these different people together. Oh yes, Daniel, like to go.
Yeah, thanks. So it was a really interesting exercise overall, and I think that it really did help. And I think this was apparent at the end when we were working through the actual scenario and the recommendations, that our ideas came very easily because we had thought about it in a very good and systematic way. I would say that there was some confusion initially in terms of kind of how to use and kind of set up our thoughts in terms of the drivers and what rows we were doing and making spaces and how we were all supposed to select. And I guess I would just suggest, if you were to do it again, in your initial description of what we were going to do, is maybe have maybe a picture of the rows and say and a template in terms of that stuff already filled out as an example.
Okay, yeah, that's a really good idea, actually. Yes. Yeah, I will make a note of that, because I think that's a good idea. It was obviously when setting up the session, I wanted to kind of bounce off the last session pretty quickly, but I think having a visualization of it, especially because it's quite a complicated board. No, I appreciate that feedback, because it's really important, and this is something that I want to keep doing, and we'll use some of these tools on the policy cycles, and we'll keep working on and refining this, and perhaps keep doing this kind of program every year, and maybe change it up. So that's really useful for future practices. So thank you very much.
Yeah, totally. And it was all figure outable, I will say, and everything worked out really well. I think Miro, you got used to it. So yeah, good.
Great, thank you. That's really good to know as well. Going forwards, and that it ultimately worked. Sarah, do you have to speak?
Yeah, just to piggyback on Daniel, and also I emphasize it was ultimately figure outable, and moving on to exercise 2, there was a renegotiation of what we did in exercise 1 and how we could repackage it within the time we had allotted in order to actually wrap things up as expected. So I feel like we became more satisfied with our outcome when we had the longer chance during exercise 2 to rethink what we did and repackage it. But here's maybe how what Daniel alluded to played out in our case. So when we were doing exercise 1 and we were maybe drawing too much on our experience doing the same exercise of filling the wheel out last training session, the wheel and how it's set up in terms of concentric circles, the widest being planetary, the planetary scale security, and then the global, regional, national, individual, human, etc. This really drives one to think in terms of the implications of the issues we chose rather than drivers. It was a bit difficult to think of, well, what are the drivers in terms of planetary scale? So everyone was just, even though we hadn't even discussed this beforehand, we were just so bogged down by thinking only in terms of implications. But then when the second part of exercise 1 was set up in such a way that we were requested to come up with a scenario, they were like, okay, wait a second, we were talking about implications. Where are the drivers here? What is the scenario and what are the drivers? So I feel that there was, in your description and in what is written like in the board concerning the task, there is a certain conflation between drivers, aspects, characteristics, issues, so that it really wasn't clear what we should be putting into the wheel. So I don't know if that's helpful for you, Declan.
Right. No, I think that makes sense. So, because kind of the idea with the board and the way that it is, so it is designed to make you think of the implications. And I think I've kind of misworded when I've spoke about when we taking the kind of issues and also the main implications. I meant the main implications to go with the driver. So yeah, it's meant to make you. The board is designed to make you think of the implications of the driver that you've selected, and then those kind of implications, like, kind of become drivers. But yeah, that I can totally say that phrasing's weird, because the board, so the board did encourage you correctly in terms of what to do, but I've not quite worded it clear enough in terms of that it was meant to do that. So no, that makes total sense. That's thank you. And yeah, for the kind of the having to kind of renegotiate what we did in section 1, that's part of the reason that part 2 was as long as it was, because from doing this myself, there's always a bit of renegotiation when we've came back to the next part of the section, and you kind of spent, that's why it was 30 minutes rather than say 20, because I thought it might take about 10 minutes that's what it took. It took at least that probably in when I did this version of the exercise in DC, and then once we nailed down, once we had it, made it a lot clearer. But we had to, there's always that point where you've got to renegotiate and kind of make some decisions on where the focus is going to go, because obviously, as you've just experienced, there's a limited time on that. So thank you very much for this feedback. It will go into how we reapply this going forwards for obviously the policy cycle, but also for future sessions as well. So we've just got into the last 5 minutes. Is there anything else anybody wanted to add from their groups or any feedback? Because again, this is all much appreciated. If not, and seeing as we've nearly got to time anyway, just before we
sorry,
wrap...
I was trying to find the virtual hand whilst raising my real hand.
Yes. Sure.
Hi. It's just a kind of reflection I've been having. I don't know if people would agree or disagree, but and it might be kind of what you want, as in you as in basic, not you personally. But I think that just by nature of these sessions being online and having so much crammed into a few hours, it's very likely that the future policy recommendations are going to be based upon things that already exist. Like, I recommend like ratifying the TPNW, or it's going to be things that exist just because of time. And I think also being online, not having like a creative outlet to like imagine or construct, I think potentially even just doing these activities on paper would yield very different results than working online, which is not something you can control or change. I just thought it's maybe an interesting thing to think about in terms of, I know the word creative has been in like think creatively, And I do think that that's a very difficult thing to do with strangers online, maybe moving forward.
Yeah, that's great feedback, and again, really appreciate it. And just first of all, on the paper thing, because the first time I did the training, I did it online, and the second time for the fellowship, we did it in person. And I think you're absolutely right. There's a big difference in that. We also had in DC, we had the full day where the exercises bounced off each other. Like we probably, we had more time on that as well. In terms of the scope for this, because obviously we only had time for kind of 4 limited training sessions. It was much more about giving people experience with the tools than say what the policy recommendations are. The policy cycles, the sessions will be more focused, but each session will build off the back of each other for the policy cycle. So you'll be in the same groups, your work will continue through the sessions, you'll get to use again a couple of different tools, and then by the end of it you should have hopefully have more time. But yeah, the online aspect is something that's very tricky to work with. But yeah, the main point of this was to get used to the tools, experience what they're like and how they work. And it's but the recommendations,
it's definitely done that. It's been really good for understanding the tools.
Yeah, that's great, thank you. And like obviously we're not planning on making anything out of kind of the findings from this, but what we will do, so when I upload kind of the recording of the session, and kind of the breakout rooms can't be recorded because of the way Zoom works, but for the instructions, I'll also send out the link to this mirror board, so you can all go back and keep looking at it and keep accessing kind of what you've done as well afterwards. But yeah, with that being said, as we've kind of got to time, I'll wrap up the session here. So again, thank you very much for all of the engagement and all of the feedback as well. It's much appreciated. The next session will be exactly in 2 weeks' time, on December the 19th. So it'll be Thursday at the same time, 1 p.m. to 3:30 p.m. on visioning. So yeah, in 2 weeks' time, I've sent the links out on through email. I'll send out reminders as well. And then just to let you know that the fourth session, which we've already announced, which will be on mapping with Chris Spedding, using the program Kumu, that's going to be on Thursday the 9th at 1 to 3:30 p.m. That will be quite different to this one, as that is using Kumu, which is a really interesting tool. That one is, again, that session I would especially emphasize is obviously we're trying to give a taste. Kumu does not take 2.5 hours especially to kind of use. So it would be very much kind of getting a taste of how that program works, because there's a lot of research possibilities in it, actually, I think. And especially if you like to visualize your research, whether you're quantitative or qualitative, it's a really interesting tool. But it's obviously that'll be a very much an intro session, and then to see if you kind of want to keep going forwards with it and you can developing it into your own research, because that program does take a lot of work. I certainly haven't mastered it yet, but yeah, those will be the final 2 sessions before we kick off with the policy cycle later in that month. So I'll be hopefully sending out and fully booking in the launch event, hopefully today, on that. So you'll know when that will be. That'll be an informal, more of an informal call to kind of get up to speed with what we're planning and how that cycle is going to look. But yeah, with that being said, I'll finish the session. As you've been on this call for plenty of time, thank you very much again for engaging with this, and for those of you who's managed to stay for the whole call, as I know it's quite the commitment. So yeah, I'm looking forward to the next session. And again, if you have any feedback, if there's something you'd rather email to me or message me about, then just let me know. But yeah, thank you very much again, everybody, and I look forward to seeing you soon.